sisters in the Lord Jesus Christ, those who make up the family of the Wheatley Heights First Baptist Church, and for those who may yet gather with us on a weekly basis or consistent basis, sharing with us during our Bible study time. We greet you on this evening um, with the joy of the Lord, which we believe to be our help and our strength. And of course, in times like these, who among us does not need help nor does not need strength? I want to share with us this evening briefly from a particular book in the Bible and a particular story or account that centers around a person by the name of Naomi. She's found in a book called the Book of Ruth, but she is one of the central characters who make up this particular account. And so I want to take a moment this evening to share a few things from this particular account and this particular Bible story that I hope will serve to be somewhat encouraging to those who are going through very difficult seasons right now. Over the past couple of weeks and months, we've had so many persons who make up our family of faith who have had to endure some personal hardships relative to a number of things. And because of their cry, because of their need, and because of recent statements that I've heard made publicly about people who are struggling to get through and to adjust to the changing landscape in their lives and in the lives of those that they love. I thought that maybe I would share a few things on tonight, and hopefully it will be not only a benefit and blessing to them, but it will help us even so, who may be moving in the direction that they are already in, to know how to be prepared for our season, for our storm, for our struggle, for our ability to try to stand up when life is about to cause us to want to sit down and to stumble, maybe even so through our faith. So, in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, and the first, I think, 5 verses or so, I'll just read those. And of course, I would encourage you not only to read those 5 verses, but to read the remainder of the chapter. And it's a very interesting account and story. And some of you, I'm sure, probably already familiar with it. And so when we look at chapter 1, beginning at verse number 1 in the book of Ruth, it says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech's, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab, and the name of one was Oprah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. That's all I'm going to read for this evening, because just reading that account and hearing uh, the Bible speak regarding the affairs of Naomi's life and that of her family, I want to speak with us this evening simply about overcoming hard times. Overcoming hard times. Clearly, if we could define or describe what we read in those verses, just those few verses, 5 verses, we'd have to clearly say that here is a woman who's going to have to learn how to overcome some hard times. May I suggest to you, in starting tonight, maybe as an introductory statement, that every Christian, let me say that again, every Christian needs the ability to navigate through tough times. Every Christian needs to navigate or learn how to navigate through tough times. And not just tough times, but tough times can become rough times. And when I say tough times, I'm talking about what happens to us from without. When I talk about rough times, I'm talking about what happens to us from within. Every Christian, I don't care who you are, what your name is, how well you can do what you do for the Lord and in the Lord's service, and how long you've been a part of the church, a part of the kingdom, a part of the faith. Every Christian, regardless, needs the ability to navigate through some tough times and some rough times. I need not even ask for a poll tonight, take a census tonight to see whether or not there's anybody among us who's been through some tough times as well as some rough times. Because all of us have experienced, I believe, at some point and juncture in our lives, what we can classically call tough times. And then those tough times became rough times, depended upon how well we were able to manage our internal person, our internal feelings, the internal um, activities that were going on in our heart, in our mind, in our spirit, in our soul, as a result of what we were going through. Tough times can produce rough times. And that's not just true for me and you. You can read the Bible and you'll find so many places, so many instances where there are those who are faithful to God, love God, worship God, serve God, who had their own particular experiences with tough times. And the tough times became rough times. But God is the God who not only, if you will, may allow us to experience tough times, but He is the God who likewise helps us to be able to get through the rough times. May I say to you, and I know you know it's already true, that no believer is immune from trials and tribulations. I said, no believer. Think with me now. I don't care who it is, how old they are, how long you have watched them, noticed them, idolized them, thought them to be the strongest person in the whole wide world, can take anything, handle anything, get through anything. No believer is immune to or from trials and tribulations. There's no vaccination. There's no shot that you can take. There's no pill that you can take that makes you immune to, if you will, life and the things of life, the troubles and the trials and the tribulations and the tears that could come with life and just living in life itself. Listen, pain is a part of the pilgrimage. Let me do that one more time. Pain is a part of our pilgrimage. Not only pain, but pressures from this, that, and the other is a part of our pilgrimage. Problems, and they may be small, some of them could be large, could be big, but problems are a part of our pilgrimage. We're just pilgrims and strangers traveling through this barren land. And we get weak, but we know one who is mighty, and we look to him to hold us even in the hollow of his mighty hand. So here's I want to say to you tonight that in spite of our pains, in spite of our pressures, in spite of our problems, I want you to know that we can still prosper. When you have pains, when you have pressures, when you have problems, you feel as if though you will never be able to overcome. You'll never be able to get through it. And I want to say to you tonight that you can still prosper in spite of what you have to learn how to overcome. When you read the book of Ruth in totality, you start out hearing the bad news on the front end. But if you get all the way through chapter 4, you discover some good news on the back end. And all that simply says to us is that no matter how many problems we may have, no matter how much pressure you may come under, no matter how many problems you may have to encounter in the course of your life, know this, that there's still time for you to prosper, still room for you to prosper, still a way for you to prosper and to be better than what your situation was in chapter 1. And so thank God for this particular Bible story, an account that helps us to know that overcoming hard times is something that everybody is going to be challenged with. And let me tell you, if we had to try to, put our finger on it, it's going to be difficult to put your finger on because there's just so many different ways that hard times can come your direction. You know, there's so many different kinds of adversity that we can be challenged with. It can be physical problems. It can be things basically that just literally rattle our mind and affects our mental capacities. It's sometimes not just in your mind, but it finds its way into your emotions and not just what you think, but how you feel. And then from there, you can have social adversity. I mean, just learning how to live with, deal with, tolerate some people and get along with some people. There's social adversity and financial adversity. Lord have mercy. I know you probably know about that as well too. That your money just gets so funny and you ain't got enough to do this and enough to do that, and you're just constantly challenged. Seem like always trying to make ends meet, rub two nickels together and hope that a dime comes up. But I want you to know that our adversity sometimes even ventures into the spiritual domain. We can have spiritual adversity. Maybe I can give you some other words to help you to understand what hard times is all about, because there are people who are going through, if you will, depression. And depression is just another characterization of hard times. And I know most people don't like to talk about depression or being depressed, but depression is just kind of a state or a stage of sadness. And who has not had their season of sadness? And it doesn't mean that your depression has got you so far down in the dumps that you're ready to commit suicide or anything crazy like that. It just means that it's a gloomy time for you. It's a gloomy moment for you. It's a gloomy day for you. There's just so much sadness. And it's not that you don't have anything to be happy about or to rejoice about or to feel good about. But for whatever the reason, those periods of sadness just kind of settle in on you. And when they do, it causes, I guess, what clinicians would call withdrawal. You withdraw from others. You withdraw from things that are part of your daily and frequent and usual routine. You find yourself just kind of backing up, backing away. You find yourself just kind of sitting down, sitting still, and you just lose, if you will, your sense of interest and energy for the moment. And so depression doesn't mean that you're on the verge of a breakdown. It just simply means that there's some place in your life that has broken down. And and that's what we got to learn how to overcome. We got to learn how to overcome the adversities. We got to learn how to overcome the depression, and maybe another word you're familiar is the word anxiety. And I think that people a lot of times use the word worry to better define anxiety. Have you ever just had the jitters? I don't know how to better express it. It's just the jitters. It's a kind of nervousness. It's not that you're scared to death. You're just jittery and you're a little bit on edge. You're a little nervous. You're a little restless. And I know some of you who are old soap opera watchers, you watch probably that show called The Young and the Restless. Well, I'm talking about restless to the point where, in essence, you're just kind of not totally at yourself and being yourself. And so you got the jitters and this kind of nervousness that can lead to another thing that we call fear. And I don't know if I'm on somebody's street tonight or not, but overcoming hard times means sometimes overcoming the fear factors in our life, things that cause us to doubt, things that cause us to panic, the things that cause us to become just uneasy. I ain't scared to death, but I'm just a little fearful and fretful because I don't know what all my future will hold and how this thing is going to get fixed within me, fixed within my mind, fixed within my spirit, fixed within my soul. But I know that you know that we know somebody who is a heart fixer and who is a mind regulator. And so I believe that Naomi in this book of Ruth is the person that's going to help us somewhat tonight, because if there's anybody that we can look at and maybe listen to and learn from about obstacles, surely she is one. Overcoming hard times means overcoming those obstacles that come up in your life. You didn't put them there. You didn't ask for them to be there. Truth of the matter is, you know that they are somewhat of a reality, but you didn't plan on them showing up when they showed up on the road of your life and on the journey of your life. So obstacles are simply things that are hardships and hindrances. And I don't know if any of you back in the day during your school and childhood years remember possibly running track. And one of the things about running track was that sometimes they put them things out there on the track called hurdles. And while you were running, you had to jump over that hurdle, and then you run a while, and then you'd have to jump over another hurdle. And sometimes the hurdles were spaced a little bit further out. Sometimes they were a little closer together. But all I'm trying to say is that in this life, while we are running the race, overcoming hard times means that we have to be ready to overcome some hurdles. And you don't never know exactly where the hurdle is going to be. All you know is you're running and you're running and you're running. But while you are running, it looks like, it seems like that there is one hurdle after another that you have to learn how to come over, to get over, so that you can keep on running until you see what the end is going to be. Well, let me say this last and then I'm going to move forward. And that is that overcoming hard times, I believe, means that sometimes we've got to learn how to do what we need to do to help with our spiritual blindness. Yes, let me do that one more time. We need to do what we need to do to help with our spiritual blindness. People are accustomed to blindness in relationship to the natural, your eyesight waning, your eyesight fading, your eyesight becoming blurred, your vision becoming blurred. You can't see as clearly. you need the help of some contacts, or you need the help of some glasses, so forth and so on. All I'm simply saying is that in the life of the believer, from a spiritual perspective, sometimes we can become spiritually blinded by our hard times. And being spiritually blinded, it means that we can't see as clearly as we used to see, that our vision is being blurred, our focus is getting off. Why? Because our adversity, our periods of depression, our anxiety, our fears, our obstacles are leading us to a point and a place that could be called or defined as spiritual blindness. It doesn't mean that we have lost our faith. It doesn't mean that we don't have any faith. It just means that, if you will, that what we are dealing with, what we are going through, is causing our ability to see God in the same way, to see life in the same way, to see ourselves in the same way, to see our hopes in the same way, to see our happiness in the same way, is being now, if you will, altered by what we are going through. And when we listen to the events, and when we listen to the things that happen in the life of Naomi and how she responds to those things, I believe that we can even hear that and see that in the text itself and in the verses that come beyond verse number 5 throughout the remainder of chapter number 1. So, if I were to raise a question, I would raise the question, what does God say about hard times? What does God have to say about adversity? What does God have to say about depressive moments and anxiety and fears and obstacles in life and hurdles in life? I'll tell you what the Bible says. I'll tell you what God says about it. It's real. It happens. Expect it. It's a part of life itself. Life happens, and all of those things are associated and affiliated with life. But here's what God wants you to know. Even though you're not exempt from it, no, you're not. I am not. We are not exempt from the things that happen in life to everybody else. Even though we're people of faith, they will find their way to our doorsteps as well. But what we do have is the promise of God, that when we find ourselves having to endure those things, that we do not endure the storms of life alone. No, we don't endure them alone. That God is there for us, and God is there with us in it, and God is there to help us to get through it. As a matter of fact, I think it's in Romans chapter 8, verse number 31, which is a familiar passage of scripture. And I'm not sure that I'm going to quote it exactly, but it just simply says, if God be for us, who can be against us? If God be for you, what can be against you? It didn't say that things won't come against you. It didn't say that you won't have difficulty. It didn't say that you won't have some hard time. It simply says that when God is with you, that you can overcome any hard times, any difficulty, any adversity, any depressive moments, any anxiety, any fears, any obstacles. There is nothing that is a greater challenge in your life that God cannot help you to get through and to come through. And so I want to say to those of you tonight who are struggling in mind and in heart and in spirit with different things that are going on, different seasons that are going on in your life, then know this, that you never stand alone. And that when God is for you and when God is on your side, oh yes, you too can prosper in spite of your pains. You can prosper in spite of your pressures, and you can prosper even in spite of your problems. Know this, that God is still standing by. I know I need not spend a lot of time saying this, but adversity is something we all face at one time or another in our lives. And overcoming it means getting past the challenges that stand in your way. Overcoming the hard times simply means you can get past the challenges that stand in your way. But we must accept the fact that it is one of life's staples. And when we talk about a staple, I'm simply saying that hard times is one of those things that have to do with life that you'll never be able to take out of life. It's a staple. It's something that will be there, has been there, is going to be there, is there right now. It's a staple. And so anybody who comes into this life thinking that they're going to somehow or another live in a different world, in a different zone, in a different area, in a different domain than where everybody else has lived, and that they're not going to have to deal with some stuff, they better wake up and smell the coffee, because everybody who lives in this life must face the fact that there are things that we simply cannot avoid. I know that we never really get ready for some things, never get ready for them. But the truth of the matter is, they are part of life itself. And it is something that we just cannot avoid. Simply that. At times, it's like it's a never ending uphill battle. Ooh, I wish I could sing a song somehow or another that would echo those words, because, the challenge of life, that's what it is. It just seems like it's an uphill battle all the time, a never ending battle. But this never ending battle has the ability, if you let it, to alter your mindset. Alter your mindset. That's what the devil wants to do when he brings trouble your way. He wants to alter your mindset. That's what the devil wants to do when he purposely designs, if you will, trouble. When he puts a target on your back, he wants to alter your mindset, because in altering your mindset, it means that in essence, you're going to have some difficulty dealing with the adversity and overcoming the hard times in your life. And so I want to say to you today that this could be, if you will, an area that leads you to a place of self doubt. Whatever it is you are suffering from, whatever it is you're struggling with, it can lead you to a place of self doubt where you start doubting yourself as being saved, doubting yourself as being sanctified, doubting yourself as being filled with the Spirit of God, doubting yourself as being a spiritual person, doubting yourself as being a servant of the Lord. When hard times come your way, know this, that one of the tricks of the devil is to put on you a spirit of self doubt. I doubt that I can get through this. I doubt that I can overcome this. I doubt I can survive this. You got to watch the self doubt, because that's where, if you will, trouble wants you to end up imprisoned in self doubt. Sometimes when we have physical injuries or physical illnesses that come our way, that's a part of the hardships of life. Rejection is a part of the hardships of life. Ooh, I don't even want to spend time hanging out there, because there are some of us who know what rejection is all about. We know what rejection feels like. We know when we don't deserve to be rejected. And we know when it doesn't even make sense for people to reject us, because we haven't done anything to them, against them. And you just go through a period where you're trying to learn how to find balance in your life, because you're being rejected by people who have no real good reason to even be rejecting you in the first place, as if though something is your fault and you have no fault whatsoever. Boy, when I start talking about overcoming hard times, I want to tell you that you can't read these 5 verses we just got through reading without understanding that the hard time that Naomi had to deal with was the hard time of losing loved ones, not a loved one, but loved ones. I know you heard it. It was in the verses. Her husband, when they moved to the land of Moab, he died. I don't know how long it had been from the time they moved from Bethlehem, Judah, to the land of Moab before he passed away. But clearly, after they relocated, he passed away. And then, not long after he passed away, if she didn't have enough on her plate dealing with that, the two sons that they brought with them from Bethlehem, Judah, Malon and Chilion, they both passed away after having married some women in Moab. So now here Naomi is, if you will, her immediate family, her husband and her two sons. She's had to experience the loss of both of them, and that means now she's having to overcome a very hard and difficult time. And here she is left now with two daughter-in-laws. That brings us from verse number 1 down to verse number 5. And as I said, I encourage you to read the rest. But I need you to know this. As I look at her, and I'm going to say this on purpose, as I look at Naomi, I want to suggest to us that everyone is different. Let me do that one more time. Everybody is different. And that means that all of us will have a different coping mechanism, or all of us may need a different coping mechanism, something that works for you as a person. Do you not know that what works for one person in a situation doesn't always work exactly the same for another person in the same situation? And so it is in times of grief, in times of trouble, in times of adversity, in times of fear, in times of anxiety, in times where there are obstacles that are just simply hurdles that you've got to learn how to jump over and get over, in times of spiritual blindness that comes as a result of the troubles we're going through. I need to say this to you, and not only just to you and for you, but to you and maybe for somebody else who's going through. That's maybe how you were able to get through it. Giving that other person how you did it may not be what works for them, because we're all different people and we need sometimes a different coping mechanism that works for us. And so it is. It's like medicine sometimes. You can give a kind of medicine to one person and it works good for them, but it doesn't work so effectively for somebody else. Why? Because maybe their makeup is different. Their body dynamics are different. Maybe the level or extent of their illness or injury is different. And so it is in real life. Sometimes we have to accept the fact that the way somebody else got through it may not be the same way I'm going to get through it, but I can get through it. I just should not expect that how it worked for somebody else will work exactly the same for me. And look to God to give me what I need, because I'm a person. I'm different and made differently, and my makeup is different, possibly from somebody else. And it's not that what they have to say is not any good. It may not be, if you will, the exact prescription that I need for my particular situation. So what does God have for me that will work for me? And so know this, that when people grieve, they grieve differently. And you'll not be upset with people because they don't grieve the way you grieve, and so forth and so on, because there's a different makeup. Listen, life, if you will, is full of surprises. I don't know how else to tell you, but life is full of surprises. And sometimes they have a negative impact on our lives. Mm-hmm. Life is full of surprises. And even though we can be the best of believers, oh yes, even though we can be the best of Christians, even though we can be the most faithful people in relationship to our past service with God, know this, that life is full of surprises, and sometimes they can have a negative impact on our lives. You cannot, I cannot, we cannot control everything. And as a result of that, it means that there are going to be days when we're going to have some setbacks in our life. Did you hear what I just said? There are going to be days when there are going to be some setbacks in our life. As I read through this particular chapter, these verses as it relates to Naomi, I just see what happens to her and in her life as being, if you will, number one, a surprise. She had no expectation that when they moved from Bethlehem, Judah, to Moab, that her husband would pass in such a short period of time. And clearly, she was surprised at the fact that in just a few years, her two sons would pass away. So life is full of surprises in relationship to that, and those surprises can have a negative impact. You can't read through chapter 1 without hearing things that she says and watching things that she does without seeing how these things have had not so much a positive impact, but a negative impact on her life. May I ask you tonight, what has happened to you lately? What has happened to you recently? What is it that you've gone through? What is you've had to face that if you really got down to it and just was real honest and truthful about it, you'd have to say that had a negative impact on my life. That particular thing, that particular area, that particular episode, that particular pain, that particular problem, that whatever it was, it had a negative impact upon your life. That impact could be clearly physical, it could be financial, it could be emotional, and it could be spiritual. What impact has the season that you've gone through? What impact has the storm that you are currently in or that you just came out of? What type of impact did it have upon your life? And so it is. Life is full of surprises, and those surprises can lead to what we could call setbacks. And the setback can, in some people's life, be a spiritual setback. You put two good foot forward, and now a setback. What did it make you do? It made you take one or two steps backwards. You will get more engaged. You will get more involved. You will becoming more fiery, more faithful. You were feeling better within yourself. And then all of a sudden, a setback. And that setback affected you even in a spiritual way, to where now you're wondering, what am I going to pray for? What am I going to pray about? What prayer going to do for me? And now you get to the place where you can't even find the kind of praise at all in your heart, in your spirit, in your hands, in your feet, in your soul. You know, it's like it's a setback. And I need to tell you that setbacks will happen in your life. Now, some people have them, but you don't know they have them. They can camouflage it so well. They can keep it to themselves so well. They're experiencing a setback within themselves, but you can't see it, but they know that it's there. And not only do they know it's there, the devil knows that it's there. And not only does the devil know it's there, God knows it's there. But I need to tell you that your setbacks could literally just set you up for a better blessing, a greater blessing. And you just need to know that in essence, we will all have some setbacks. But when we have them, what we got to do is jump back. I say when you find yourself in a setback, what you got to do is jump back. And if you don't like the idea of jump back, then you got to get back. Get back to being who you used to be. Get back to doing what you used to do. Get back to talking like you used to talk. Get back to singing like you used to sing. Get back to worshiping like you used to worship. Get back to the things of God and being the kind of person you were, not just on the outside, but on the inside. Setbacks are going to happen, but when they do, it ain't no time for you to lay down. It's time for you to jump back and time for you to get back. Adversity is something that you cannot always just brush off. Let me say that one more time. The adversities of life, those moments of anxiety, those times of fear, those obstacles and hurdles, some stuff you can't just brush off like, ain't nothing happening, ain't nothing to that. I'm big, I'm bad, I can handle that. That ain't no problem. But there are some things in life that you just can't brush off so easily. It doesn't mean that you can't get through it. It just means that it's something that's going to be a process. It's going to take a little time for you to be able to deal with those obstacles, and it's going to take some time for you to overcome them. There are 4 chapters in the book of Ruth, and what we discover is that it took 4 chapters for Naomi to be able to overcome her setbacks. It took 4 chapters. Now, I don't know what those 4 chapters relate to in terms of days, months, and years and all of that. But what I do know is that when you start out in chapter 1, it just looked mighty bleak. But when you get to the end of chapter 4, all of the bleakness turns to brightness. All of the darkness turns to daylight. All of the days that were raining, now there is a revival going on in her life and in her spirit. So know this, that if God be for you, he's more than the whole world or anything in it that is against you. Let me share with you a couple of things, and then we're going to call it the night. And that is, if it's at all possible, there are some things you want to avoid. If it is at all possible, there are some things you want to avoid. Naomi and Abimelech had no way of knowing what would happen when they got to the land of Moab. All they knew was that in essence, they were in a place where famine was taking place. It was getting hard to make it. And so they decided to move to the land of Moab because they thought it would be a little bit better and a little bit easier for them if they were in the land of Moab. But they had no idea that things would change the way they did. And number one, why? Elimelech died. Number two, Mahlon and Chilion died in the land of Moab in a short period of time. They had no way of knowing that those things would happen as it relates to that. And so it is, I want to suggest today that you want to do your best to avoid, if you will, some negative locations. Avoid some negative locations. If you're going to overcome some hard times, then the best thing is, number one, to try to avoid putting yourself in places that will create hard times. You can't always read into the future, but you got to be more, if you will, cautious and careful about making some steps, making some choices that may look good at the moment, but could become more costly after the moment. It seemed like the best thing to do. It seemed like the wise thing to do. Seemed like a good thing to do. Seemed like an okay thing to do. I really don't see nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, you can be placing yourself in a very negative location. Now, life is as such, there's no way for us to really know. If they had stayed in the land of Bethlehem, Judah, would Elimelech have died at the same time? Would Mahlon and Chilion have died at the same time? The Bible doesn't tell us how they died or what caused them to die. All we know is that they died in the location where Naomi was. And so I want to suggest to you, be careful and do your best to avoid negative locations, places that look like they're all right, but in the long run won't be all right. Places that seem like it's not a bad idea, but in the long run, it could have been the very worst idea you ever had in your life. Avoid negative locations. Places, if you will, that end up taking more from you than they end up giving to you. Can I say that one more time? Avoid places that end up taking more from you than they end up giving to you. When you're going through some difficult times, some hard times, where are the places you are inclined to go? Where are the places you are inclined to turn to? Well, I want to ask you this. If you go to those places, if you turn to those places, will those places take more from you than they give back to you? That's what this land of Moab did in the life of Naomi. It took more from her, literally, than what it gave to her. And she may have seen or thought that, in essence, it can't hurt that much to live in Moab. Well, sometimes Moab is not the place where you want to live. It's not the place you want to reside. It ain't even the place you want to visit, because it'll take more from you than it ends up giving to you. Think on those things. You want to avoid, if you will, what I would call negative isolation. Negative isolation. You have to get past verse number 5 and read on, I think possibly maybe down to about verse number 12 or so, where in essence, now that her 2 sons have passed, Naomi says to her 2 daughter-in-laws, I'm going back to my homeland, and I want y'all to go back to your homeland. Go on and live your lives. I'm going to go on and live the rest of my life. In terms of that, we just going to separate one from another, and in essence, do what we have to do in the best interest of ourselves. So all I'm simply saying is that what Naomi was doing at this moment, because she's trying to overcome her hardship, her hard times, she's trying to overcome her depression, her anxiety, her fears. She's trying to get over these obstacles and hurdles that are now in her life because she lost her husband and her 2 sons. And she's trying to figure out how we're going to make it, because now the hard times that hit the land of Bethlehem, Judah, have now hit the land of Moab. So now she got another famine, another problem that she's facing. So she's moving back where she came from, but she's going back, or trying to go back, by herself. And so it is. We know that one of the daughter-in-laws does go back to her homeland, does go back to her people. But it is Ruth who stays with Naomi and says, where you go, I will go, and your God will be my God, your people will be my people. But I'm talking about the fact that Naomi was about to put herself in a place of isolation. She's trying to struggle with what she's struggling with, deal with what she's dealing with, make it through what is, if you will, causing her misery in her life, in the loss of her husband and her 2 sons. But she's attempting to try to now deal with life, handle life all by herself, without the support of her family, without the support of her daughter-in-laws. When you find yourself struggling in life, be careful that you don't try to isolate yourself. You don't try to get away from everybody, people who care about you, people who love you, people who want to be there to support you. And I'm just not talking about immediate family or extended family. I'm talking about friends. I'm talking about people in the faith, people in the family and the fellowship of the Lord. Don't isolate yourself. When you find yourself struggling with issues and with problems and with concerns and with pains and problems, with trials and troubles and tears, when you find yourself there, don't isolate yourself. Don't shut yourself up in a room saying, I ain't coming out no more. Don't close the door of your life on the Lord, and close the door of your life on people who are there to pray with you and pray for you, and people who want to pour into you some words of encouragement and help and strength. Don't isolate yourself, where you in essence say, I just got to deal with this all by myself. Why? Who told you you had to deal with it all by yourself? That's what Naomi is saying. I've got to deal with it, but I believe I'm supposed to deal with this all by myself. So to her 2 daughter-in-law, she says, listen, y'all go on. I understand. I'm going to be all right. I'm going to make it somehow or another. I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, but I don't want to mess up your life with my life being all messed up and have you hanging over me, hanging around me, listening to me and me crying on your shoulders and all of that all the time. Listen, you got to avoid negative isolation. None of us can make it all by ourselves. I don't care who you, none of us can make it all by ourselves. All of us need somebody at some time, and you've got to have that somebody at some time in your life that keeps you from being in a stage of isolation, trying to deal with stuff all by yourself. The Lord doesn't even want us in a stage of isolation. No wonder he says that my spirit shall be not only with you, but my spirit will be in you. Why? Because I don't ever want you to be in a place of isolation where you feel like I'm all by myself. I got to do it all by myself. I got to get through it all by myself. Avoid negative isolation. Now, I'll agree with you that there are times when it's good to be by yourself for a moment, for a minute, for a brief period of time. There's a time when you need maybe to kind of break away, get away. You understand? Have a little space for yourself. I can agree with that. But what she was talking about was not a momentary place and period. She was talking about total separation. And you've got to watch how, if you will, the devil will lead you to the place where you see yourself needing total separation from those who have been your support system and have been there for you. The Bible says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. In other words, there are people who stop coming to church, stop doing church, stop being church because they start going through something and they move into a negative isolation. And the Bible says, don't do that. You understand? It's not good for man to be alone. It's not good. Oh, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together. And when we do dwell together, it ought to be done in unity. But there can't be no unity if we're not willing to dwell together. And you can't dwell together if you're trying to be isolated from everybody. And so it is. Avoid negative. What was the word? Isolation. Okay, here's something else I want to tell you. Avoid negative proclamation. You got to get all the way down to verse number 20, all the way down to verse number 20, and hear what Naomi says. She's talking out of her hardship. She's talking out of her hard times. She's talking out of her pain. She's talking out of her pressures. She's talking out of her problems. And here's what she does. She makes negative proclamations. What does she say? Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. When she gets to her homeland and people see her coming and they say, oh my goodness, even after all these years, we can still recognize her. Here comes Naomi. And the first thing that comes out of Naomi's mouth is, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. In other words, that's a negative proclamation. She's gone through so many things that have, if you will, a sense of negativity to them, that it has caused her to become a negative person, to speak negative words, to think negative thoughts. And it goes from not just speaking negative words and thinking negative thoughts, but it goes deep down within to having negative emotions. So she says things in a negative sense, rather than accepting that, if you will, sense of joy of being able to see her return. She just said, don't talk about it's a good day. What's so good about it? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Because, if you will, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. That's what she says. She says, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. Oh my goodness, what a negative proclamation. Can I say something? I've had some good days and I've had some bad days. You have too. Some good days and some bad days. But my good days have always outweighed my bad days. And even though I can say I've had some bad days, I can still say I've had some days that God has been good to me. I've had some days that God has blessed me. I've had some days that God has kept me. Can you go back to what we read earlier? We read earlier that even though when they moved from Bethlehem, Judah to Moab, Elimelech died. That's what the Bible says. But it was a space about 10 years later when the two sons died. So, what did God do from the time when her husband died to her children died? It meant that God took care of her and took care of them. That's what it means. It means she had a bad day. She had a rough period. She had a tough time dealing with the death of her husband. But what did God do? God still blessed and kept and maintained them in a strange land until them boys got them some wives. And after they got them some wives, oh Lord, have mercy, they too passed away. But guess what? God is still taking care of her right now. God has brought her, if you will, on a journey from where she was to where she is back home, kept her from all hurt, harm, and danger, kept her alive physically and all of that. I know she's struggling emotionally, she's struggling mentally, but the bottom line is, even though she had some hard times, she still had a whole lot of good times that God ought to get some credit for, that God ought to get some glory for. So you got to watch and avoid negative proclamations and things that come out of your mouth as a result of the hard time and the season and the storms that you may be going through. I'm through when I tell you this, and that is that her life is a life can be defined maybe in 4 words. Here it is. Number 1, famine. Word number 2, fatalities. Word number 3, feelings. Word number 4, future. Let me do that one more time. When we look at chapter 1 all the way through chapter 4 of the book of Ruth, this book ain't just about Ruth. This book is about Naomi. It's about Naomi's famine. She left Bethlehem, Judah, and she went, if you will, to the land of Moab because there was supposed to have been food to eat in the land of Moab. But she lost her husband in that land. She lost her sons in that land. And so that, if you will, deals with the fatalities in her life. But then we go to her feelings, because it's after those losses that takes place. It's after life deals her a tough hand to learn how to play that we find out about her feelings. Her feelings are clearly expressed in verse numbers 19 and 20, and even some thereafter. But after we get past her feelings, what do we discover? We discover her future. And when you get to chapter 4, I hope you'll keep reading, because when you get to chapter 4, you'll discover that the woman who had experienced famine, that the woman who had to deal with fatalities, and the woman who had to learn how to deal with and overcome her feelings is a woman who had a prosperous future, because God turned around that thing. God turned that season around. God turned that storm around. God turned that sorrow around. God turned all of that she had gone through in her life around mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And she had a more favorable future in the last chapter of her life than she had in the beginning chapter of Ruth chapter 1. May I suggest to you, it ain't over yet, and that God is still working on your behalf. God is still working in your favor, and God knows what you're facing, and God knows what you're going through, and God knows that you can make it, because God ain't gonna let you not make it. Let me say that one more. God is not going to let you not make it, because when God is on your side, he's more than whatever is going on in your world that is against you. Well, listen, I'm through for tonight. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you. And I say to all of you, whether it's your sickness, whether it's your sadness, whether it's your sorrow, whether it's your feelings, whatever it is right now that represents overcoming a hard time for you, know this, that God is able and God makes you able. God bless you and God keep you is our prayer.